Hundreds of rocket attacks all over Israel, hitting into Tel Aviv, up into Jerusalem, up beyond Tel Aviv. And the Israelis are now stepping up their attacks against these Hamas strongpoints. They're trying to stop those Islamic terrorists from launching rockets against their country. Well, that could mean a long, drawn-out battle in the Middle East, and it may involve Israeli troops or boots on the ground, as they say. Here's Wendy.
And Israel could be getting ready to send in troops as well. Chris Mitchell brings us that story.
Millions of Israeli civilians are taking cover in bomb shelters as Hamas continues its rocket and missile bombardment out of Gaza. The terror group has fired over 200 rockets into Israel since Monday, a situation Israel's ambassador to the United States told CBN News is intolerable.
We've got about 3/4 of our population that had to go into bomb shelters. So to put that in American terms, and you're talking about over 200 million Americans who'd have to go in bomb shelters. Now, what do you think the American people would want their government to do, the American military to do, if they were faced with rocket attacks from a neighboring territory where 200 million people are rushing into a bomb shelter?
Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system has reportedly had a success rate of about 90% so far in shooting down those Hamas missiles. Israel continued its campaign to destroy Hamas rockets and the infrastructure to manufacture those rockets. The IDF reported more than 100 underground missile launches were hit and a number of houses used by Hamas leaders. One senior security source said not a single Hamas brigade commander has a home to go back to. In Gaza, more than 50 Palestinians have died so far in the conflict. Yet to avoid civilian casualties, Israel employs a policy of warning Gazans. They call it the knock on the door, by calling civilians to leave a home or area before they strike. Hamas sometimes then calls people to the home as human shields. They did the same thing during Operation Pillar of Defense in 2012. On the diplomatic front, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called a number of world leaders and said no other government would tolerate this kind of rocket fire. Netanyahu and Israeli Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon said the operation would not be over quickly. Meanwhile, more reservists are being called up within Israel as it prepares for a possible ground invasion.
There have been 200 rockets fired into Israel since Monday, and I ask myself, what in the world are those people in Gaza thinking? They're militarily overwhelmed by Israel. What are they trying to do? I mean, it's like sticking a stick into a hornet's nest and standing there and seeing if the hornets come to sting you. Well, of course they're going to sting you. Israel has to defend itself. Well, Chris Mitchell is now with us from Tel Aviv. And Chris, you're near one of those Iron Dome anti-missile locations. Tell us about it and how effective are they?
They're very effective, Pat. I'm standing behind one right now in South Tel Aviv, and just today they've hit down about 5 rockets that have come into this area. It's really quite an amazing thing to see. Just the other day, we were down there on the border between Gaza and Israel, and you could watch the rockets come out from Gaza City, fired by Hamas, and then you could watch the Iron Dome actually shoot them down. And sometimes it's not like a straight arrow to arrow. It's they can go in a curly-Q motion just to be able to track that missile. So it's an amazing technological development. It's a joint U.S. project, and a lot of people think it's money well spent.
Chris, up to the time, they were using so-called Qassam rockets. What are they using now that hits as far away as they are?
Well, they have a whole level of rockets right now, Pat. The first one, as you mentioned, is the Qassam rockets. It's kind of crude, it has a short, limited range, and it's homemade. The next level is the Garad rockets. That, again, is homemade within Gaza itself. The third one is called the M75. It has a range of about 50 miles. It can hit places like Beersheba. Now, the last level they have is sort of an M302 missile, and these are the ones that have come to Tel Aviv and even north of Tel Aviv, 40 miles north of Tel Aviv, which is the furthest any of these missiles have ever come out of Gaza. And as you can imagine, as the ambassador to the U.S., Ron Dermer, said, imagine all these millions of Israelis going to bomb shelters. We saw it yesterday. And Pat, it reminds me a little bit of 2006 when we were up on the Lebanese border when the Hezbollah was firing Katyusha rockets and basically shut down northern Israel. And this is happening here, not only in southern Israel, but the central part as well.
Chris, they're not making those things on the West Bank. Where are they coming from? Are they coming from Iran? Are they coming from Russia? Syria? Does anybody know the source?
Well, Well, Pat, some of them are coming from Syria. They're made in Syria. These are the M302 missiles, and they come via Iran. They come through Iran. They get on the ships. And just a few months ago, Israel commandos, they intercepted one of these ships. We were down there in the port of Eilat, where they put on display 40 of these M302 missiles that have a long range. And these are the ones that are firing way up the coast from Gaza. So they're made in Syria, go through Iran, and they've been smuggled in through the tunnels. The hard thing for Hamas lately is that the El-Sisi government in Egypt has now cut the border and closed the border, so some of these long-range missiles are not able to get through. Obviously, they have some stored.
Sooner or later, Israel's going to have to clean out those nests, because they could move those rocket launchers from place to place, put them and hide them in civilian areas, and it's tough to get. Is Israel coming in with troops, do you think? Is that the plan?
That is the plan. If the rockets don't stop, Pat, I think that is the plan. We talked to a former national security advisor the other day, and they said they have two goals. The first one is stop the rockets and bring quiet to the south. The second goal is to degrade the Hamas infrastructure to be able to fire these missiles, to be able to manufacture these missiles. And that's what they've been doing with these airstrikes systematically over the last few days. That will undoubtedly increase, I think. And if they don't stop, if the missiles don't stop, then I would expect sort of a ground incursion. But that obviously carries its own risk to the Palestinian civilians, risk to the soldiers. It can get quite messy.
Chris, you know, I'm trying to put this thing together. When things are illogic, you can't understand it, and this is totally illogical. Why would a little tiny thing like Hamas on the West Bank, I mean in Gaza, why would they attack Israel? They know Israel has overwhelming force. What is the game plan?
That's a good question, Pat. We've been trying to figure that out ourselves. There certainly is a religious logic to them because of their Islamic belief. They want to eradicate the state of Israel. They want to kill Jews, and that's part of their logic. But I think on a more strategic level or tactical level, they want to actually open the border with Egypt. That's one of their demands. They want the Palestinian Authority to actually give them money, because the Palestinian Authority cut their money supply off after the kidnapping of these 3 teenage boys and then their tragic murder. And finally, one of the other things they want to do is have Israel release some of the prisoners that they were freed during the Gilad Shalit kidnapping exchange. And so those are some of the things that Hamas wants on a short-term basis. But obviously they know that on a long-term basis, Israel has the military might to come there and wipe them out. It's a question right now that Israel's asking themselves. Do they want to go in there? Do they want to? And what would happen if they ever toppled Hamas in the Gaza Strip? Who would take over? Who would govern that place?
Well, again, it's counterproductive what they're doing unless they have a plan to link up with Hezbollah or Syria or ask for an Iranian engagement or some kind of. There has to be some other chess move to be played. You haven't figured that one out yet, though.
Well, one other thing we have thought about is Iran. If Iran is trying to provoking Hamas to be able to distract Israel and have a sort of a ground operation while Iran continues its nuclear program. You know, Iran has cut off ties with Hamas in the last couple of years, but this would be one way Hamas could get back in their good graces. And so I know people have told me here, security officials, that they want to keep their eye on the ball, and the ball is really Iran and its nuclear program. This can be somewhat of a diversion. But when you have rockets, you know, firing through most of Israel, it's something that the government needs to address, needs to take care of.
Well, thank you, Chris. Chris Mitchell, and maybe the enemies are trying to find out some weaknesses or exploiting vulnerabilities for future action. We don't know. But again, it's illogical. It doesn't make sense what they're doing. And you ask yourself, what is on their mind? I know extremists can do illogical things, but this makes no sense to me. And there's got to be some game plan underneath it we haven't seen yet. Well, here at home, President Obama is facing fierce criticism from Republicans and Democrats over that border crisis. He's playing pool in Colorado with this huge flood of illegal immigrants flooding into the country of America. Well, John Jessup has more on that story from Washington. Here's John.
Pat, President Obama came pretty close to the U.S.-Mexico border Wednesday, but not quite all the way. In Dallas, he met with officials and religious leaders to discuss the growing humanitarian crisis. But as Charlene Aaron reports, critics say he's making a mistake by not visiting the border himself.
The president's trip to Texas included a political fundraiser and a meeting with local leaders, but no visit to the U.S. southern border to see the unfolding immigration crisis.
I'm not interested in photo ops. I'm interested in solving a problem.
The GOP has been blasting the president for his decision to stay away from the border. He's met with Texas Governor Rick Perry, who's been highly critical of how his administration has handled the crisis.
The president has sent powerful messages time after time by his policies, by nuances, that it is okay to come to the United States and you can come across and you'll be accepted in open arms.
But even some Democrats say the president needs to see firsthand the effects of the surge of unaccompanied minors crossing illegally.
He's so close to the border, and let me say this, when I saw, and I hate to use the word bizarre, but under the circumstances, when he is shown playing pool in Colorado, drinking a beer, and he can't even go 242 miles to the Texas border, and plus, if he doesn't want to go down to the border, there's the Lackland Air Force Base that is where HSS is holding some of the young kids from the border. He can at least make that trip to San Antonio.
Tens of thousands of unaccompanied minors streaming across the border from Central America have overwhelmed the government's ability to respond. The president has asked for nearly $4 billion for emergency spending to address the border crisis. Republicans oppose the move, blaming the administration's policies for the crisis. Texas Republican Senators John Cornyn and Ted Cruz contend the president's efforts to relax some deportations have contributed to rumors circulating in Central America that once here, migrant kids will be allowed to stay. Meanwhile, the crisis is not likely to go away soon, given the huge amount of illegal immigrants still crossing the border, with one FEMA official saying kids are coming in faster than they can discharge them. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Well, some critics have called the border crisis President Obama's Katrina, a reference to the difficulties President Bush faced after that disaster. Now the man who was a key figure in that controversy, former New Orleans Mayor Ray Nagin, is going to federal prison. Nagin was sentenced to 10 years Wednesday for bribery, money laundering, fraud, and tax violations stemming from his 2 terms as mayor. More than 1,800 people died during Katrina. And adjusted for inflation, the total costs and damages came to around $150 billion. Well, former IRS official Lois Lerner warned her colleagues to be more cautious about what they wrote in emails because Congress might be looking at them. She sent an email to a colleague in 2013 just as Congress was getting into its investigation of the Tea Party targeting scandal. She wrote, "We have had several occasions where Congress has asked for emails, and there has been an electronic search for responsive emails, so we need to be cautious about what we say." Some Republicans believe this is yet more evidence that Lerner was trying to hide what she was doing. Pat, more fuel to the fire.
Listen, nobody who's doing it straight is concerned about somebody reading their emails. The only people who are doing that are those who are pulling a surreptitious end run around the Constitution, around Congress, around the law. Lois Lerner is not a nice person. She just doesn't do right things. And she stands there and says, I'm not going to answer any of your questions because of the Fifth Amendment. I'm pleading the Fifth. My right against self-incrimination. So she's worried about emails incriminating her. She's worrying about her own testimony incriminating her. So you ask yourself, what has she got to hide and how do you cover it up? I guess the only way they're going to get this is to say, we give you a blanket grant of immunity, now talk. And if that happens, she gets off scot-free, but at least you learn what happens. But I don't know what else will happen. It's going to be hard sending her to jail in the circumstances they are now, but she should wind up with a striped suit doing a little time, it seems like to me. John?
Pat, turning to health news, it's not just the American people who are fat, so are American pets. And that's led to a rise of fat camps for pudgy pooches and chunky cats. 53% of dogs are overweight or obese. And for cats, nearly 58% are fat. And those obese pets can have the same diseases as obese people, like diabetes, joint problems, heart disease, and a shorter lifespan. One reason, Owners give their pets an extra snack or two during the day. So now luxury pet hotels and spas across the country will customize a fitness program for a plump dog or cat. And some fitness camps will work with overweight animals to get them back to a healthy weight. Pat, that kind of puts the phrase fat cats back into perspective, literally.
Hey, that's your line. Good for you.
Good one.
Right.
Hey, Pat, you can't blame high fructose corn syrup on the fat
I tell you
cats.
what, I buy Purina dog chow. Up to that time it was Purina puppy chow. My puppy had 2 cups of that stuff, period. Now she gets 4 cups of the adult, period. And that's it, all day long. And if she doesn't like it, it's tough luck. And she loves it. She eats every mouthful of it. But that's it. And every so often I have little treats to get her to do tricks and stuff. But healthy, happy dogs not being overfed. But if you're feeding them table scraps plus the dog food, canned dog food, a lot of gravy and all the things that go along, of course they're going to get fat. Humans would get fat. Don't feed them your scraps. The food you eat is probably poison. Give them what, you know, a company like Purina, some of those other dog food, they've got much higher nutritional standards than most food that human beings eat. So
people hate to waste food, and they say, well, let's give it to the dog.
Well, I mean, you scrape the plate, and here's Fido. Whoop, whoop, whoop. He's standing on his legs, and he looks so pathetic. Oh, he's just a little.
But you're killing your dog if you do that.
That's right. If you hate your dog, you'll overfeed him. You want to kill them early if they're a pain in the neck? Well, I mean, that's the way to do it. Give them all the table scraps they can eat. Don't I sound cruel?
It's tough love, Pat.
Tough
it's
love.
Tough love.
I have healthy dogs.
That's right.
That dog's healthy.
All right. Chinese hackers broke into computer networks of the U.S. Personnel Management Office. That's the office that houses personal information for all federal employees. The New York Times reports the attack occurred earlier this year. Hackers were seeking to access the files of federal employees who had applied for top secret security clearances. Senior U.S. officials confirmed the attack in March, saying it was blocked. They say no loss of personally identifiable information has been identified. It's still not clear how far the hackers penetrated the agency's systems. A church in Bradenton, Florida displayed a first-hand lesson in forgiveness after their offering was stolen. The pastor of Kirkwood Presbyterian Church says she was just about to put the offering in the safe when a young man in his 20s walked in, grabbed the bag, and bolted out of a nearby door.
How desperate do you have to be that you would steal from a church? The church should be a place of grace. It should be a place of second chances. So yes, there is forgiveness, but he's going to have to work through the consequences of those sins, whether that's personal or on a legal level. He's going to have to address that.
That congregation quickly posted a sign in front of the church proclaiming forgiveness over the theft, which could have topped $10,000. Remember, you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website, cbnnews.com.